With Iran's nuclear breakout timeline now at zero, analyze the view from Beijing and Moscow on Iran's capability to produce nuclear weapons in short order. China and Russia are still interested in reviving the 2015 nuclear deal, which will lift sanctions and lower tensions in the region. Beijing and Moscow have substantial economic ties with Tehran and stand to benefit from a normalization of trade. China and Russia are concerned about the destabilizing effects of a nuclear Iran and nuclear proliferation. So it is in both countries' interests to have a deal with Iran. Furthermore, Russia and China need to balance their ties with Iran and their relationships with other Middle Eastern countries. A series of high-profile events on the international stage has laid bare the perilous trait of great power relations as China and Russia challenge the US-led global order and raise the prospect that they could deteriorate further. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Tuesday that Russia would suspend its participation in the last remaining nuclear arms treaty between Moscow and Washington, a vestige of the security architecture that has helped keep the peace for decades. Since around 2017 to 2018, the world has been living through a period of progressive erosion or collapse of international order inherited from the past. With the election of Donald Trump and the rapid increase of US containment of Russia and China, which is both a consequence of this gradual erosion and also represents deep internal and international contradictions, this process entered its apogee. A period of collapse opens up possibilities for the creation of a new world order, hopefully a fairer, stable, and peaceful order that has been previously experienced. Russia has a good chance of influencing the formation of a new order. However, the establishment of a new world order will take time, and in the meantime, serious conflicts and crises could occur. The current state of US-Russia relations is just a beginning in this regard. In the medium term, the priority for major powers is to prevent a new large-scale war, which is becoming highly likely. In this regard, Russia, again, intends to act as a key security provider through its foreign and defense policies. Russian achievements in defense declared by President Putin in his 2018 address to the Federal Assembly strengthen deterrence and show that achieving military ascendancy and changing the overall military balance is impossible, thus deterring an arms race and creating the preconditions for a dialogue with Washington. Russia's pivot to Asia will continue, and the Greater Eurasia Comprehensive Partnership concept will gradually be substantiated and thus will become a zone of stability and a powerful unit within the global order. No major improvement in relations with the United States is in sight, mainly because of the situation within both Western societies and the Western international community itself. At the same time, Russia will continue to deepen partnerships with China and India and to enhance cooperative relations with US allies and partners like Japan, South Korea, and when possible, Western European countries. Neither major European allies nor Asian allies of the US support further escalation of the Russia-West and US-Russia confrontation. Maintaining these relationships seems the best way to forward the confrontation's conclusion on terms compatible with the current state of the world. Russia's policy, therefore, is to maintain tactically flexible, prepared for every eventuality, but also to be more strategic than ever in building a world order that is stable, peaceful, and comfortable for Russia. As the US and Europe are not ready to engage in order building with Russia and other major non-Western actors, instead adopting an oppositional posture, and primarily due to internal political reasons, because they are highly unlikely to so engage in the next decade, a new international order's emergence is more likely to occur in the 2030s or 2040s than in 2020s, after the inevitable rotation of elites in the US and the EU. The main reason for the general confusion among Western elites and the tension in world politics and the international economy is the simultaneous decay of most global and regional international political and economic orders, by which here we refer to systems of rules, norms, and patterns of behavior accepted by a majority of actors at a particular time. This decay had been brewing for a long time but has only become visible in the last decade. Figuratively speaking, several tectonic plates on which international order and its underlying concepts that have stood have begun to move. The most dramatic shift is the end of the 500-year-long dominance of the West, firstly Europe, then the US and its allies in politics, economy, and ideology. This is chiefly due to loss of the military superiority the West had possessed since the 16th and 17th centuries. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin set their sights on shaping a new world order as the Chinese leader left Moscow on Wednesday, having made no direct support for Putin's war in Ukraine during his two-day visit. Xi made a strong show of solidarity with Putin against the West, but he barely mentioned the Ukraine conflict and said on Tuesday that China had an impartial position. There was no sign that Xi's effort to play the role of peacemaker had yielded results. The West has sought to isolate Russia through global sanctions, and Putin faces an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. China has not supported any of the moves, and the West is concerned it may help arm Russia in its conflict, which Beijing has denied. As Xi and Putin ended their talks on Tuesday, the International Monetary Fund announced their preliminary agreement with Kyiv on a 4-year loan package of about $15.6 billion to the shattered country. Separately, the United States intends to speed up delivery to Ukraine of 31 Abrams battle tanks to the autumn. Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier General Patrick Ryder told reporter, "First, the idea that Western governments are preserving the rules-based order is not persuasive to many around the world, considering that Western governments themselves have already abandoned it on many fronts. While Russia and China obviously have been challenging the post-1945 international order, many across the so-called Global South would say that Westerners, too, have routinely revised international rules and institutions to suit their own interests." These observers would point out that the first hammer blows came from the Western-led intervention in Kosovo and invasion of Iraq, not with the subsequent Russian invasions of Georgia and Ukraine. The West may not be using military force today, but it has not held back from using economic instruments to its advantage, from sanctioning anyone who trades with Iran and Russia to proposing taxes on developing countries through carbon border adjustment mechanisms. Moreover, in some areas, Western countries have moved from revising global institutions to abandoning them altogether in favor of what is portrayed as a new rich man's club built on novel concepts like friendshoring. Many leaders around the world enjoy highlighting such hypocrisy, compounding the West's legitimacy crisis. The second assumption is even more problematic. US President Joe Biden has committed himself to the narrative that the world is divided between democracies and autocracies, implying that those in the middle should be persuaded or pressured to choose sides. But most countries reject this idea and instead see the world moving toward deeper fragmentation and multipolarity. Countries like India, Turkey, South Africa, and Brazil see themselves as sovereign powers with the right to build their own relationships, not as swing states obliged to placate other powers. With the strains worse than at any time since the Cold War, Mr. Putin's threat to arms control in a speech in Moscow came a day after President Biden traveled to Ukraine and vowed unending support for Kyiv in a fight Mr. Putin considers an existential one for Russia. Also in the mix, China, whose top diplomat Wang Yi excoriated the US at a security conference in Germany before arriving Tuesday in Moscow to see Russian officials, and people familiar with the matter said, likely propose a summit between Mr. Putin and China's Xi Jinping. The developments signal greater stress for the international system as Washington and its allies contend with a rising China, which has provided an important economic lifeline to Moscow, and a revanchist Russia seeking to negotiate the end of the Cold War. Russia and China have a common interest in weakening US dominance of the world order, which they likely assess they have been strengthened by Western unity over Ukraine. An intent between the two would replicate their Cold War anti-Western partnership, with one significant difference, that Beijing rather than Moscow would be the dominant partner. The prospect of the two great autocratic powers that dominate the Eurasian landmass moving closer together carries risks for Beijing. It would probably force European countries that are now hoping to maintain close commercial ties with China to move more decisively toward Washington, on which they depend for security. If that happened, geopolitical competition between the West, along with Asian democracies such as Japan and South Korea, and Moscow-Beijing axis would solidify. China has already provided significant support to the Russian economy, buying up Russian oil. It has also sold microchips and other advanced technologies that have military uses, a step that risks future Western sanctions that would further corrode relations with Beijing. Beijing, however, faces a difficult balancing act. The greater its support for Russia's war, the more it will tarnish its relationship with Europe. Moreover, the more frayed ties grow between Washington and Beijing, the more Europe may feel drawn to the downscale economic and diplomatic engagement with China.